Persona 5 Strikers, which was developed by Omega Force and P Studio and published by Atlus, is an action RPG game that was released a few weeks ago. It was released last year in 2020 in Japan under the name Persona 5 Scramble, and it was released stateside around 2 weeks ago as Persona 5 Strikers. And this game is a direct sequel to Persona 5. Not Persona 5 Royal, but the original version of Persona 5. So it omits the additions that were added to the narrative additions that were added to the original Persona 5 with Royal. It basically pretends as if Royal never existed. So there's no Kasumi in this game. There's no Dr. Maruji. You know, there's none of those characters exist in this game, or in this version of the continuation of these characters. So this game presents itself as an action game, an action RPG, which is a huge departure for Persona in general. The Persona games are turn-based games in their true nature. Persona 5 was a turn-based game through and through. This is not a turn-based game. It does use some gameplay elements from the original version of Persona 5, but beyond that, this is an action game. So you can run around with the characters and perform actions in real time combat. There's some similarities that you could draw to Kingdom Hearts. There's some similarities that you can draw to the Final Fantasy VII remake, but ultimately this is a crossover between Persona 5, the original version, and Koei Tecmo's Dynasty Warriors series. Now, I've never been a fan of the Dynasty Warriors games. I've always found that series to be pretty dull and just not very fun, considering all they do is throw hundreds of enemies at you on screen at once, and you just have to take them all out. But usually with games like that, the combat is lacking, and it's nowhere near as fun as what it probably looks to be on screen if you're just watching someone else play, or you're watching like a gameplay video or whatever the case. Persona 5 Strikers does suffer from that a little bit. It does suffer from there being too many enemies on screen at times, because usually what happens is you'll be thrown into a combat scenario where there's dozens upon dozens of enemies on screen at once, and either they won't put up a fight, to the point where the game is completely unsatisfying because of how easy it is. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where some of the enemies will put up a good fight to the point where the game just becomes frustrating. The combat system just becomes a slog to get through. It's really like that towards the beginning of the game. The more you level up, the easier it does get, at least with the basic enemy encounters that you come across while you're playing through the 7 different levels that they have in this game. The problem, though, comes from the boss fights. The boss fights in this game after the 3rd jail is really just annoying, super frustrating, and just downright broken. Because the bosses have been designed to where only specific characters within Phantom Thieves will be able to actually stand a chance against them and actually have the magic needed to stagger the boss. And that's a big problem because, for one, it limits player choice. And so when you arrive to the later boss fights in the game, you can't just take whatever 3 party members that you want in the battle. You have to choose the best character suited for that particular boss. And another problem is that the bosses themselves just become damage sponges, and it gets worse the farther you go in the game. And the bosses are so overpowered to where you'll try and launch a series of attacks against them, and you're not even really doing chip damage. You're doing like a fraction of what chip damage actually is. You can just be sitting there for what feels like 30 to 40 minutes just hacking away at the boss and not really making any progress because of how unbalanced and once again how downright broken a lot of the bosses are. So the bosses were a big problem in this game, and it was so bad that I actually had to lower the difficulty, and I never lowered the difficulty setting for any video game that I play. If I choose a specific difficulty option when I first start playing, that's the difficulty that I stick with. This game is one of the rare few where it's like, yeah, that was really doing nothing for me. I was just wasting my time with the bosses, replaying the same boss over and over again. That can wipe out my entire team within just a few attacks. And then I have to keep going to the retry option. And that just nagged on my nerves. So much so that several points throughout my playthrough, I really just wanted to put the controller down and just stop playing entirely. So this game has a wide variety of bad examples of how to develop boss fights, or in this case, how not to develop boss fights for an action-based combat system. Another problem with Persona 5 Strikers, and I would say really the biggest problem with it, is that it is not anywhere near as good as the original Persona 5. And the main reason for that is because it removes a lot of what made Persona 5 great, as well as titles within the series that came before Persona 5. So some of the things that I'm talking about are the time management. There is no time limit in Persona 5 Strikers. The game does not try and force the player to make decisions of how to spend their time. You can freely go in and out of the levels, the dungeons, which you couldn't do in Persona 5 because that would count as a day. You really had to manage your time properly in Persona 5. And the whole point of that helped emphasize the RPG element that the game is set in as far as the genre goes. Persona 5 Strikers doesn't have that. Another thing that Persona 5 Strikers omits are the confidant characters from the original game. The only side character that shows up for a very brief cameo, and this character doesn't even appear in person, but through dialogue, is the character Sai Nijima, Makoto's older sister. She makes a very brief voice cameo late in the game, but outside of that, which is already a lazy cameo, the other characters that were in Persona 5, such as the doctor, or the girl who plays Shobi, or the fortune teller chick, or the journalist girl, all of those characters and then some don't make an appearance in Persona 5 Strikers. And it's a huge wasted opportunity, especially for anyone who devoted a lot of time in the original game to develop those characters and learn about those characters, learn about their backstory and all that, and connect with them on an emotional level. Those characters don't make an appearance in Persona 5 Strikers whatsoever. Another thing is, there are locations from the original game that do make an appearance, and those locations do make a return in Strikers, but a lot of the areas from the original game have been cut off, and the areas that do return are basically downsized. And so what you're left with is just some half-assed level design, where you can tell the game developers didn't put a whole lot of time and effort into developing the hub worlds, the various hubs that you visit throughout the game. And this game is divided up into 7 different levels. Instead of exploring palaces again, you explore what's known as jails. From a story perspective, this is an entirely new concept, but from a gameplay perspective, you're mostly doing exactly the same thing that you did in the original Persona 5, which is you'll enter a dungeon, you'll play through the dungeon, and then you encounter a boss at the end of that dungeon, and then you beat that dungeon and you move on to the next one and do the same thing over again. The thing here that's missing is the emphasis on stealth. The stealth does return in some form in Strikers, but it's really lazy the way they presented it, and it's no longer really necessary as well. The level design within the jails are also a big problem because most of what it is just a bunch of wide open space that the player basically free roams through, and there's really no consistency with it. It's very weak and lazy from an aesthetic perspective, and the levels just aren't engaging the way they were in the original game. As far as the new characters go, there are a few new characters. The police detective that accompanies the Phantom Thieves and helps them out in their journey throughout the game, Zenkichi. I did enjoy that character. That was the best character that they added to this. And then there's a scientist that plays a bigger role towards the end of the game. I thought that was a good character as well. The major character that was really added, though, that they place emphasis on, and this character is actually on the cover art for the game, is a new character called Sophia. And this character is an artificial intelligence that exists inside these jails or whatever. And out in the real world, she's not allowed to step outside of the jails because she's an AI. And so she just exists on the phone of the Joker character. That character didn't really connect with me. I didn't really care for that character or what they were trying to do with that character. And by the time that character reaches the end of her specific character arc, I still didn't really care. I thought the design of the character was childish. Really made me scratch my head as to what the target audience for that character was supposed to be. And gameplay wise, I found that Sophia is actually the weakest character in the game. Her attack damage is weak. The design with the yo-yos as weapons didn't really pull me in. And quite simply, Sophia just ended up becoming my least most used character in the game. Now, as far as the characters go, every character is different. All the characters play similarly, but they're different in nature as far as what their specific individual abilities and their individual skill set is. But I found myself really using all of the characters in the game at some point and switching between them consistently, which is what the game encourages you to do in the first place. But particularly, I found myself using Haru a lot. I found myself using On a lot. I found myself using Yusuke and Makoto a lot. But as far as the absolute best character in this game, I would say it would be a mix between Zenkichi and Yusuke. Those characters are extremely proficient at handling crowds of enemies, and they're great at staggering bosses. And so those characters really just became my go-to. I found that Joker wasn't as strong as he probably should be, even though he technically is the leader of the Phantom Thieves, and he should be the strongest character in the game, but he's really not. So I'm not sure, what their goal was behind Joker and some of the other members of the Phantom Thieves, such as Morgana. Morgana really wasn't that great either. He wasn't at the beginning of the game, but the further I got, I realized how useless he actually is. I just found myself sticking to the same set of characters more so than others throughout my playthrough, even though I did use everyone here and there at some point. As far as the story goes, this story is pretty trash. It's not good at all. It seems like it was rushed, like they just threw something together and just, turned in a rough draft, basically, of what the story The Strikers is supposed to be. And I found that the ultimate theme of the story just not only was it cliche, but it just seemed try hard and a little bit too on the nose, a little bit too direct, and ultimately the story is just nowhere near as good as the original Persona 5. One of the main reasons Persona 5 works so well is because of its story and the characters as well. The Phantom Thieves and Strikers don't really grow. They haven't learned any new lessons or anything from the beginning of the game all the way through to the end compared to where they were in the original game. There's really no character development at all with any of the actual main characters themselves, and I found that to be extremely disappointing. And the side quests as well are just boring. I really played only one side quest in this game, and that was it. After I completed that one side quest, my stance on the side quests were, I'm not playing these. I'm not going to waste my time with these. This shit is boring. And what really pissed me off was that they have this bond system in this game where it's almost like a skill tree almost, and you can level up different attributes that affect the characters both in battle and outside of battle. The problem is that a lot of the abilities cap at a certain level, and essentially the game forces you to play through the side missions in order to unlock the next tier for those abilities with the bond system. And that actually affects how much damage the characters dish out in combat. And the bond system does determine how easy the game is once you reach the later levels. All in all, if I had to make a final verdict on Persona 5 Strikers, this really is a disappointing sequel. I did enjoy the action-based combat because while it does appear to be just a simple button masher, it really is not. You will die pretty quickly if you just jump into a fight and just start mashing buttons. There are combo attacks for all the different characters in the game, and some of those combo attacks will allow you to use magic spells without actually using any magic. And that creates for a great sense of strategy on the player's part. While I did enjoy the combat and it was fun actually controlling these characters in real time, the story simply is weak. The characters do not grow from their last appearance in the original Persona 5. The time management system that the Persona games are known for is MIA in Strikers, which makes this seem less like an RPG and more like a straight action game, and that's a huge problem. A lot of the side characters that were in Persona 5 are also MIA, and not only are they MIA, the game doesn't even reference most of them. Like I said, the only character that makes a brief cameo appearance is Sai Nijima, and that's only through dialogue, and it's in one scene late in the game. And while I enjoyed, some of the new characters, the one specific character that the game focuses on that was added to the story and everything, I didn't care for. And so, all in all, it's just an okay game. It's really not that great. It's not a bad game at all, but it's really for the hardcore audience of Persona 5. That's what Strikers is for. That's what it's aimed towards. That's what the game is aimed at. This game isn't really going to pull in anyone that didn't like Persona 5 or anyone who's never played a Persona game, anyone who didn't play Persona 5. This game is not really going to, change your mind. And for anyone who hasn't played Persona 5 before, this is not a game that I would recommend to be your introduction to these characters and to this world. You got to play the original game. If anyone has any interest in Persona 5, I would definitely recommend newcomers to experience the original game first, and then after you complete that, then play Strikers. Speaking of which, another issue with Strikers was the length. This game was way too fucking long. It's around 40 hours long. Some gaming websites have reported this to be around 25 to 30 hours. That's bullshit. Maybe it was 25 to 30 hours if you skip all the dialogue and the cutscenes, but you add all the dialogue and the cutscenes and everything, this is easily around 40 hours. Unlike the original Persona 5, this game does not earn its length at all. And it could have and should have been cut in half as far as the time goes. So, that's really it. That's all I got to say about Persona 5 Strikers. And so the next game that I will be playing is Resident Evil Village, and that's due out for release in early May. And that's actually my most anticipated game of this year. So that should be interesting. And I might play the Legendary Edition of the Mass Effect series when that releases in May. But I don't plan on doing any sort of retrospective for that, simply because they're just old games being remastered, basically. And so, I'm not going to waste my time with that. But for Resident Evil Village, I do plan to do a retrospective for that. And if that changes, then I'll definitely announce it in a future video.